My name's Mike Smith, and welcome to the National Press Club Morning Newsmakers program. Today we're talking about Guantanamo Bay and accountability for human rights violations in Cuba. And we have a very exciting panel, and we're looking forward to the discussion. Now, our first order of business is that Lieutenant Colonel Vandeveld was unable to be here this morning, so he is not with us. But in the package that you have, there is a declaration filed in support of Mohammed Jawad's habeas corpus litigation. So, and other documents from the Lieutenant Colonel who resigned his posting in protest of the perceived torture in Cuba. Pinch hitting for him and on board here is Emmett Bondurant, and he is representing several of the victims of the situation in Cuba at Guantanamo Bay. And I'll introduce him in just a moment. Background on all of the speakers is also available in your press kit. I will, by disclosure, tell you that I'm working with Huffington Post, and we'll have an article in the Huff Post, as well as a short article on the National Press Club Wire, which is our standard publication, the newsletter. By second way of disclosure, I'll say that I also supported the publishing of a book. Pat's here, so we were involved in book publishing together. But this was a book called Inside the Wire, which was done by a translator who was working in Guantanamo during the interrogation process. Interrogations were done both by contractors as well as U.S. government and military officials. So the Inside the Wire book was the first expose, if you will, of how that situation unfolded. I also have my own public affairs firm in Herndon and Reston. Let me introduce our panelists today. Emmett Bondurant currently represents 2 Guantanamo detainees, one of whom has been held in solitary confinement for 6 years. He's been a trial lawyer for 45 years, and he has his own firm. He specialized in antitrust earlier, but he's representing plaintiffs now and defendants in other areas, including professional malpractice or complex corporate disputes. He's filed briefs at the federal and state trial levels, and he has filed some action in the appellate courts as well, and will be representing these 2 detainees. He argued his first case in the Supreme Court in 1962 and was 26 at the time. He served as a trial lawyer of the year in Georgia and has been on the American Board of Trial Advocacy in '92. In 2000, the National Law Journal recognized him as one of the top 10 trial lawyers in the U.S.
The purpose of this whole endeavor is to recognize those in the military who stood up for the Constitution, for the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and for basic civil rights and constitutional rights on behalf of the inmates who stood up for the rule of law at the risk of their careers. For those of us in private practice, we essentially have no great risk. We may get boycotted, whatever, but nobody's going to fire me tomorrow. Nobody's going to put me in jail, I don't think, for representing a Guantanamo inmate. But for those in military service, both in the JAGs, some in the State Department, some assigned to Guantanamo in prosecution roles, who looked and saw things and stood up and said, this is wrong, I will not participate, I will blow the whistle on it, they deserve great recognition and great thanks. The inmate whom we are currently representing is a man named Mohammed El-Anzi. He is a relatively young. When he went to Afghanistan in early 2000 to teach the Quran in a village, he is not terribly well educated, but is a Muslim, was in Afghanistan, and so far as anyone can tell, did essentially nothing there except what he said he did, which is teach the Quran at a small village. In 2001, when the war began, he ultimately decided that he should return to Yemen. He crossed the border into Pakistan, went to the Pakistani police to say, can you tell me how to get to the Yemeni embassy? They said, sure. They took him instead to Peshawar, where he was put in a prison with 5,000 other people, and then sold to the U.S., where he was taken to Kandahar. And at Kandahar, and you have in your packets, an affidavit which he has signed, which is not classified, which is a matter of public record, which interestingly enough, the government tried to get removed from the public record in the court in D.C. He was brutally tortured in ways that you have not heard, exceeding anything that has yet been published in the press. I have seen his hands. He has no fingernails. They were ripped out while he was at Kandahar. While I didn't ask him to take off his shoes, he said the same thing happened with his toes. While at Kandahar, his interrogators brought in a little box, which essentially was a car battery, I assume, where for hours during the night he was subjected to repeated electric shocks of the type that you have read of the various juntas in South America and other places. Their version of waterboarding is not the dainty practice that Dick Cheney has described, in which a hanky is put over somebody's nose and the sandy water is sprinkled on the hanky under the supervision of a doctor or a psychiatrist. He was taken to a brick table placed face down, and you're talking about midwinter there, with a barrel at the end, and repeatedly over a period of hours during the night, his head was held underwater until he nearly drowned. He was beaten, the other kinds of interrogation about which you have heard. He later is moved to Guantanamo. This is late 2001. And since 2001, he has been held in solitary confinement.
Scott Horton lectures at Columbia Law School, teaches international humanitarian law, and is involved in international business transactions. He's a lifelong human rights advocate. He served as counsel to Andrei Sakharov and to Elena Bonner, among other activists in the Soviet Union. He's co-founder of American University in Central Asia and has been involved in some of the most significant foreign investment projects in Central Eurasia. Scott recently led a number of studies on abuse issues associated with the conduct of the War on Terror in New York.
There are 6 lawyers in the Bush administration who played a key role in introducing the torture and abuse policies of that administration. Emmett's already talked about some of them. John Yoo, Jay Bybee, David Addington, Jim Haynes, Alberto Gonzalez, Doug Feit. Those are the names I would cite up front. And I picked this 6 for a particular reason, because they're now the subject of a criminal investigation. Not a criminal investigation in the United States, by the way. A criminal investigation being supervised by Judge Eloy Velasco in the Audiencia Nacional in Spain, in Madrid. Likely to go on for some time. And in the opinion, first opinion that was issued by that court dealing with this investigation, which arose from the torture of 5 Spanish citizens who were held in Guantanamo, the judges conclude that the particular focus of that investigation should be on, quote, the intellectual authors of this scheme, close quote, and not the interrogators sitting in the room who dealt with them. That's exactly a correct perspective, which very well reflects modern jurisprudence and its approach to dealing with torture as a conspiracy crime. And let's compare that with what the U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder has done. He has appointed John Durham to conduct a special preliminary investigation with the focus really being put on 10 cases identified by the CIA's Inspector General, several of them homicide cases, but with a focus on the role played by the interrogators at the bottom of the transactional chain. And strong suggestions coming from the Attorney General that they're should be fully entitled to rely on opinions that may have been issued by the Justice Department, and strong suggestions that there should be no examination of the bona fides of the opinion writers, nor examination of their potential legal culpability. In other words, diametrically opposed to the opinion issued by the Spanish State Security Court, which correctly states the law. And Eric Holder appears to be determined to close the door.